A happy Thursday to you, Central Georgia. Thanks for tuning in here for a look at your extended forecast. More details coming into a clearer focus as we get closer and closer to this potential winter weather event. So it looks like some areas going to be dealing with nothing but rain, but some areas have a better likelihood of seeing some potential winter weather impact. So we'll go over which areas have the greatest likelihood and the latest update with our models. So your weather impact alert, no change to it. Still for a potential wintry mix and some possible ice accumulations along with that wintry mix. That could entail some freezing rain, maybe even some sleet that begins to fall, but we are not looking at anything in the way of snow showers this go round. That's what we had on this past Sunday, and very thankfully the roads weren't of much concern. When you do have a wintry mix and you have ice accumulations, that is going to create some very messy travel conditions. So that's one of the main impacts that we are going to be on the lookout for over the course of this weekend, and of course we'll be updating you according to the GDOT website and reports that do come in. And mainly those hazardous and slippery road conditions are going to be present more so on some rural roads. I do anticipate that GDOT, along with many other state Department of Transportations, are already going ahead and brining and salting the roads, but those roadways are going to be the main roadways. So I-75, 285, I-16, I-85, all the main interstates here in the state of Georgia. Honestly, I don't even know if they'll make it down to I-16 since given farther to the south, it's less of a risk for some of those icy conditions, but they will continue to treat the main roadways as opposed to those rural roadways that you do see in your smaller towns and your smaller cities here in central Georgia. So we could be looking at the potential for maybe a few long-lasting power outages. It's all determined by how much ice that you accumulate. We'll go over the thresholds of where that ice can be impactful and what the models are forecasting in terms of those ice accumulation totals. But like I said, higher confidence in the impacts farther to the north in central Georgia. We'll talk about just how far north we are forecasting some impacts. I have a great graphic that I just spent the last 30 minutes working on, kind of trying to depict the potential risk all across the northern half of the state of Georgia. But your first headline and your more immediate forecast, what you're going to be walking out the door to both Thursday and Friday, are on and off showers. So yes, we have 2 days of rain to talk about before that wintry mix possibly gets going as early as Saturday afternoon, and we could see impacts linger into the beginning of the work week next week. So we'll talk about what time we're going to see more of a wintry mix, maybe what time we'll see more of a rain event, and what times we are forecasting those numbers to dip back below that magic 32-degree number. So I guess I don't have the quad view up, but this does tell the story. Maybe some partly cloudy skies. Right now it doesn't look like too much sunshine here at the Georgia National Fairgrounds. Also a couple of school buses. Maybe they have something going on with some of the schools, an event here down here in one of the barn buildings over at the fairgrounds. But here's a look at your temperatures. And this is very similar to what we would normally see during a wedge setup. But right now, this temperature difference mainly caused by cloud cover. So areas farther down to the south and the southeast, a little bit warmer because they have some peaks of sunshine throughout today. But as you go up to the north and the northwest, you see more cloud cover, and there's some cooler air present up in our northernmost counties where you see a 46 in Monticello and a 49 in Eatonton. So if you did see this morning's forecast, and we'll show it on the day graphic in just a moment, it's kind of a middle ground high temperature because obviously areas farther down to the south are going to have a much different high temperature than areas farther up to the north. So plenty of cold air in the northern half of the United States. That is where that colder Canadian air mass is creeping down, but it's beginning to kind of clash with a warmer and a more moist air mass that's coming up from the northern Gulf. So that's why you see a fine gradient in between these green colors transitioning into some blue colors. And this is kind of going to mark the difference between types of precipitation that you will see over the next couple of days. Areas farther to the north in the darker blue shades are going to have your fair share of some snow showers, and that will eventually transition into more of a wintry mix. And then farther down to the south, the closer to the Gulf Coast that you get, it's going to be more so a rain event. So dew point temperatures, they've gotten a slight uptick, but in fact we are looking at these to drop down as we go throughout the next couple of days. Winds and wind gusts, an isolated gust maybe up to around 10 miles per hour right there in Macon, but overall the winds are relatively calm throughout today. Not expecting too much of a factor with those throughout your afternoon forecast, and your feels like temperatures pretty accurate of what the actual numbers do read. Some 60s down to the south, mid 50s, low 50s in the middle of central Georgia, still holding on to that one upper 40 all the way up in Monticello. So yesterday, your high temperature was 57, pretty close to average, but still below average for this time of year. And we started out at 21 degrees, 15 degrees below average. But in fact, yesterday was the anniversary of when we hit the coldest temperature ever recorded in the Macon area. Take a look at your almanac yesterday. 1985, we recorded -6 degrees for a record low temperature. That is absolutely criminal, like I've been saying with this graphic over recent days. But the record low for yesterday, or the day before yesterday, was 1 degree. So the record for yesterday all time, -6 degrees. I did some digging with almanac data a few weeks ago about the coldest temperature all time that we have seen, and it is that -6 degree mark that we saw back in 1985. 1954, however, so about 31 years prior to that, 79 degrees, so a record warm day here in central Georgia, which was 20 degrees above average for this time of year. Your year departure continues to go down in that negative direction, but once again, with our fair share of rain events, maybe some wintry precipitation, I'm not really too concerned with this year departure of rain. We're going to have a series of a couple of weeks, maybe even a couple of months as we get into more your severe weather season, where we will have some more substantial rainmakers to put that number back in the positive direction for your year departure. So nothing to fret about right now. We're only 21 days into the month of January. But 57 for that high temperature yesterday. That is marking the 4th day in a row we've had a below average high temperature. Now, depending on what the temperature gets to today in Macon, it might clock a below average day, but some areas are already above average, down into the low 60s farther down to the south. But 57 is important because now we have 8 days that have been below average for your high temperatures. I do imagine before the month of January is said and done, with the very cold spell that we are going to encounter as we go into the beginning of next week, I do anticipate probably about an even amount of below average days and above average days. It's just kind of a flip-flop of what we had for the month of December. We started out very cold, and then we ended the month of December on a warm note. Well, January, we started out on a warm note, and then we are going to flip the script and now get into a nice cold stretch of weather as we close out the first month of the new year. Scattered rain throughout today, but that's not the case everywhere. Clear and sunny skies are also going to continue to be present farther down to the south. 62, middle ground high temperature, like I just said. Some areas are already above that in our southernmost counties. Some areas don't look like they'll get anywhere close to 62 degrees, like the 40s that we did see up in Monticello and in Eatonton. So hour by hour, you will see that the warm-up does steadily continue as we go into the 2 p.m. hour. If we hit the 60 degree mark like the Meteorologist says, that would mark an above average day. So it remains to be seen if we'll see a gray box, we'll see a red box today, maybe even a blue box if we don't get those numbers quite that high. But as we go into the evening hours, we will see our fair share of some 50s, but the cloud cover, once again, just like we did see as of last night into this morning, it is going to continue to help to some warmer numbers to walk out the door to tomorrow morning. So scattered showers all up to the northeast of us. You'll have some pockets of some yellow, maybe some orange, indicating some very isolated pockets of some heavy, maybe even some steady rain. But for the most part, this rain is of the lighter nature, kind of clipping our northwesternmost counties. So that is going to continue to be the case throughout the rest of today. Cloud cover is a whole lot thinner, and we don't even see any clouds some places down to the south and the southeast. And you can see that we're not alone. Northern portions of the state of Georgia today are going to receive more rainfall than us. I think they had about a 70% chance of rain up there as opposed to our about 30% chance of rain down here. But it will continue to be on and off as we continue to just pull this moisture from west over to east. This is 2 p.m. later in the afternoon, some clusters that are a bit more widespread than others. Then we go into the evening hours. Looks like those rain chances scatter out. But then we transition into midnight. This is going to lead to our fair share of some scattered light showers, and then as we go into the morning hours, that's where we're going to start to once again reintroduce some rain. But as we go into tomorrow, cloud cover pushes down to the south, and some of those scattered light showers do also push down to the south. Basically, what you need to know is have the rain jacket ready to go in case you need it for Thursday and for Friday. And then as we go Friday evening into early on Saturday morning, this is where the start of changes will begin to occur. So mainly just a gloomy atmosphere for the morning hours on Saturday. I don't expect much to get going in the way of potential wintry weather until we get past lunchtime. So here's the midday hour, still no shades of any of those colors of pink or white or maybe even some purple that could indicate some snow. but then you will begin to see them pop up. It's really hard to see them. It does kind of blend in with the cloud cover right here, but 3 p.m. mainly to the north of us. That is a common theme that you will hear me say over the course of this forecast. You will start to see that they are of the scattered nature. It is a whole lot more widespread up here behind the banner. You can take a look at that widespread pink stretching almost the entire length of the banner. So the chances of this wintry mix precipitation going to be greater and going to start in areas farther to the north of us earlier on Saturday. Keep that in mind as we talk about your watches right now that have been issued. So we continue into the nighttime hours. Overall, for the most part, I'm not anticipating really any impacts throughout Saturday. You may come across a patch of some sleet. You may come across a patch of maybe some freezing rain, maybe some occasional slick spots that are a little bit of a nuisance on the roads. But overall, I think your Saturday plans are going to be good to go. It's just going to be still a bit of a messy atmosphere. And if we do have this wintry mix variety, it is going to be a very cold atmosphere paired up with plenty of cloud cover and the occasional wintry mix shower. But I do anticipate maybe most of the impacts to start as we go overnight into early morning on Sunday. So future view goes all the way out until 4 a.m. on Sunday right now, where you do see a good cluster of some widespread moisture in the form of rain over to the left back into Alabama and in the form of that wintry mix, freezing rain and sleet that is a bit more widespread and a bit heavier than just those spotty showers of a wintry mix that we did see. That looks like it's going to creep into the picture as we go into early on Sunday morning, and I do anticipate the temperatures to be low enough as we go Saturday night into Sunday morning for even more of a wintry mix. So in terms of the rainfall, first and foremost, we'll cover that very quickly. Expect maybe 1/4 of an inch of rain at the very most. Most of your rain, I think, this weekend might come of the wintry mix variety, but over the next 3 days, that's the story. On and off showers, still going to be of the light nature. I do anticipate a slightly cooler number for a high temperature tomorrow, given that the cloud cover will be more widespread, not kind of half and half forecast like today is. And then we go into Saturday. High temperature of 45 degrees right now. So that temperature is going to be very, very important because we will talk about it in terms of our high resolution model, which we now have within view, at least for the first day of this event on Future View. But here's what I mean, a half and half forecast for today, upper 40s, low 50s for highs in the areas that hold on to the cloud cover and rain today. You are a lot clearer and seeing some warmer numbers in the low to the mid, maybe even the upper 60s, farther down into south central Georgia. Throughout tomorrow, it's more of a uniform forecast, but still a difference from north to south of about 10 degrees for that high temperature between Eatonton and Cordele. But now let's go into Saturday morning, where we start out somewhere in the low, maybe the mid 40s, and as we go into the upper 30s farther up to the north. That is going to indicate our wedge setup. So a wedge setup is when we have cooler and drier air funnel in from the north, and the Appalachian Mountains kind of act as a guide for that cooler and drier air. So you will see areas like Eatonton, Milledgeville, even if we were to put a location right here on Sparta, those areas are going to be a whole lot cooler than areas farther down to the south here in central Georgia. But take a look at the temperatures as we go throughout the day. They don't go up. They in fact go down. So temperatures in the mid to the upper 30s, some low 40s, but still not seeing anything pop up in the way of those pink shades until we get farther and farther into the afternoon. And it's really those areas that are just a few degrees above freezing temperature, maybe even around a 33 or a 35. And then we go into the evening hours, those numbers drop down after the sun does set. So if we go the graph route, it's going to be a pretty chilly afternoon. And as we finally start to drop the numbers going Saturday night into early Sunday morning, we're already seeing some upper 20s, some widespread 30s, 31s, 32s, as that big cluster of pink is going to begin to creep in. So that's going to be a more than conducive environment for something in the way of a wintry mix. Obviously, you may even keep your hopes up that that might be something in the way of snow. However, I do anticipate there will be some relatively warm layers of the atmosphere scattered about from where the precipitation does fall and all the way in between hitting the surface, or maybe the surface might be a little bit too warm. So this might fall of the frozen nature, something of the sleet nature. We'll get more into what I mean by that wintry mix in just a moment, but just know that we're going to go ahead and get that started as early as the afternoon hours on Saturday. It shouldn't really impact any of your day-to-day plans. Make sure that you're bundled up, you have the raincoat, and you're being cautious on the roads in case any areas of some of those slippery conditions could pop up, but I'm not anticipating any ice accumulation until we get into early on Sunday. Afternoon high temperatures, these are all up in the air. Some models are calling for upper 60s on Sunday. Some models are calling for 50s. And then we just saw the graph model, which makes me think that we'll have some numbers maybe that creep up into the 40s, but we are going to be really cold as we go throughout the afternoon hours on Sunday. So right now the temperatures are kind of the tell-all, and we can't really fine-tune it because each and every model says something completely different. But where we do have a good amount of confidence is the morning low temperatures. 32 is what I put for a morning low on Sunday, but you just saw some upper 20s popping up on the high resolution model. I wouldn't doubt that we have a good period of some sub-freezing temperatures or right there around freezing temperatures on Sunday morning. But keep this in mind as we go into Monday, 27 degrees for a morning low temperature. That is going to be a hard freeze. Our threshold for a hard freeze is 28 degrees. So it looks like most areas or any standing bodies of water that we continue to have past this weekend are going to freeze back over as we go into Monday morning, hence why we're keeping the weather impact alert until we go into Monday morning. So here's a look at what I mean by what I say wintry mix. That is going to be your freezing rain and your sleet categories. Both of these tie into what I mean by a wintry mix. And the only difference between the two is going to be freezing rain is exactly like rain. It starts out as a liquid. It falls all the way through the sky as a liquid because it's encountering a warmer layer of air. But once it gets down closer to the surface, or when it hits the surface, that's when it starts to freeze over. That means the surface is going to be a whole lot colder than some areas that are a little bit higher up in the atmosphere, and that's what can contribute to the formation of ice. Now, sleet is a bit of a better scenario than that freezing rain because you are going to watch water start to fall as a liquid, but it's going to freeze a little bit higher up than surface level. So it's going to form those tiny little ice pellets that you may have noticed before in winter weather events of the past. They kind of sting just a little bit when you're standing outside and it's a bit of a heavy sleet shower, but this is going to be a better implication in terms of a wintry mix. We would definitely root for sleet as opposed to freezing rain because that means it is going to hit the ground as a solid. Yes, it's going to create maybe a couple of those ice pellets scattered about the ground, but overall it's not going to freeze back over. But however, the sleet is going to be very compact, and it is mostly water compared to snow, which is mostly air. So when we do get some sleet that is on the ground, it does take quite a long time to melt. So if we are to keep that on the ground for an extended period of time, try to melt it in those afternoons where we do get above freezing, it could result in maybe some more water that's trying to linger on the surface and maybe some slick spots that could last a little bit longer. But your freezing rain is really the nastiest impacts in terms of those ice implications. Obviously, your snow, we're not really forecasting that this time around, but that is going to be water that does fall of the solid nature, and it continues to fall as a solid as it goes all the way down into the ground. So we would definitely prefer that. We would definitely prefer what we had this past Sunday for this weekend's winter weather event, but unfortunately, we are looking at that mix of freezing rain and some sleet. So here's a look at future view with the longer range models. We'll go through these very quickly because the one thing that you're going to want to know according to these models is how much ice are we looking to accumulate. So it does look like as we go into Saturday night, most of those precipitation chances of the wintry mix still farther up to the north and the northeast. You can kind of see this wedge set up in real time. Areas down in south central Georgia still having more of a rain event, but it's more of a wintry mix in our north and northeastern most counties, along with areas getting up on the I-85 corridor. And then that transitions into more of a rain event as we go later into Sunday afternoon. I think the timing's a little bit off. I do expect us to get above freezing as we go into your Sunday afternoon. But as we go into the evening hours, I'm actually forecasting temperatures to drop down below freezing temperature. Remember that hard freeze I told you about going into Monday morning? So I don't necessarily buy the fact that it's going to be straight rain all the way until it does move out. I do anticipate the numbers to get colder just like they will Saturday night into Sunday morning. So maybe on the back half of this, we could have something in the way of potential very brief snow showers, but that's also going to continue to contribute to some messy conditions as we go into the future. So once again, Saturday throughout the day, this is 8 p.m., even going forward into around 3 a.m. Overnight is when we first start to see maybe some ice forming, and it's still going to be of a relatively thin nature. Once you get into these lighter pink shades up near Athens, they can get up into upstate South Carolina. That's indicating your higher totals that are going to get above about a ½ inch of ice possibly. But this is just what one model does say, and it does have a good amount of our northern counties here in central Georgia, according to the GFS, accumulating some form of ice. And once again, it doesn't take too much ice in order to have some pretty drastic impacts. So now let's go to the European model. So this is going to be the counterpart of the GFS, typically one of the more reliable models. However, it doesn't necessarily hold on to this wedge setup as good as some of the other models. So that's what we are seeing with this. The wedge isn't as profound down in central Georgia. It's more just north and northeast Georgia. And the National Weather Service has said, kind of take this model, run with a grain of salt, just given historically it doesn't really estimate where the wedge is going to be set up for the longest period of time. It typically overestimates how much warm air advection does start to overtake when you start to get maybe some moisture moving in from the Gulf. But according to the European model, this is not going to be an event for us whatsoever. This is just going to be some rain. And if we go with the temperatures, according to the Euro model, upper 60s, near 70, we can see our fair share of some pretty heavy, maybe some steady showers, and maybe even a few rumbles of thunder, according to this model run, if we go into Sunday. But we're not putting too much stock into that as of right now. But you can see the ice accumulations. Those are going to be north of central Georgia, and they are going to be north of I-20. So we will go all the way out into the future, maybe around 8 a.m. on Monday. That's one thing that I'm not seeing. I'm not seeing more ice accumulation getting added on to what we see Saturday night into Sunday morning. So this makes me think that these models are not picking up on anything that's still standing at the surface in the way of liquid water refreezing as we go into Monday morning. So we'll have to take that into account and maybe add on some potential accumulation on top of the ice numbers that we have seen so far. Then one more model run, the NAM model, where you can see, once again, it's more similar to the GFS model. This has the pink shade moving into north and northeast central Georgia, transitioning into more of a rain event as we go later into Sunday, and it only goes out until the evening hours on Sunday as of right now. So taking a look at its ice accumulation, 2 p.m. on Saturday, still nothing. Finally starting to pop up as we go, once again, overnight Saturday into early Sunday. So I would anticipate your fair share of some patchy ice, especially farther in northern central Georgia as we wake up and head out the door on Sunday morning. And then we do see some of that kind of creeping into our northernmost counties, Jasper, Putnam, and areas of Greene County, getting into Hancock County. That obviously is kind of right there in the middle run of what you saw with the Euro, that's a little bit farther north, and the GFS that goes a little bit farther down into central Georgia. Still not much accumulation of ice, maybe only about 1/10 of an inch or so. And according to Future View, it backs this claim that we're not going to really see any of these impacts as we go into Saturday night. We play it all the way out until we go to 7 p.m. No ice in the near vicinity of us. Some is already popping up in northern Georgia. I did take a zoomed out view before this, but it is going to be overnight Saturday into early morning on Sunday. So Sunday morning is when you should plan on some ice being present out on the roads and out in some areas that do have maybe some standing bodies of water or just that freeze over in the overnight hours. So overall, just taking the guidance from all of those models and looking at others on the computer that we don't have in graphic form, here's a look at the severity of the impacts. Northern Georgia definitely has the highest severity of those impacts. Dalton, Gainesville, Clayton, getting up into Blue Ridge, Ellijay, those areas. As you move down into areas like Canton, the metro Atlanta area, Madison, Athens, and northern Jasper, northern Putnam, and northern Hancock counties, we have a moderate severity of impacts. Then we go down into Macon, Milledgeville, even Warner Robins at the farthest south, low severity of impacts. So you may be asking me, okay, that's all nice, Alex. You made a color map right here. What does this mean? Well, I made another graphic explaining what I do mean by those impacts right there. So high, that is going to be the category up in northern Georgia. Not of concern for us. They are expecting significant snow, sleet, or ice accumulations, and those are looking very likely. Even some gusty winds up to 30 miles per hour. And yes, the winds can help play a factor in some of the damage, especially when you have things like ice on power lines. That obviously, if you have the wind just kind of combating and hitting that ice that is making the power lines a bit thicker in nature, more surface area to hit, that's going to make them more susceptible to being blown down. Moderate impacts, which does start to clip northern central Georgia, there's still a good deal of uncertainty with the moderate category, that middle category. But the potential for significant ice accumulations, it doesn't look like much, but like I said, it doesn't take much ice to impact things. About 1/10 of an inch to 1/2 inch of ice is possible, and some gusty winds up to 20 miles per hour. Once again, the gustier your winds are, that's going to make things like trees and branches on trees that do get blown over, that's going to make them a lot more susceptible to being blown over rather, but most of us find ourselves in the low category, which is still very uncertain. I know that's the last thing you want to hear about 3 days out from this potential event, but right now I'm really thinking Houston County, Macon, really at the farthest south for these potential impacts, and areas farther to the north in central Georgia. That's where we are looking at those potential impacts to be. I have little confidence in any impacts really happening farther down to the south in central Georgia. So once again, now explaining the categories that I do have on the severity of impacts, that's where things stand. The farther north that you travel, you are very likely going to see more impacts here in the form of ice accumulations. The I-20 interstate is kind of the cutoff line, and obviously this stretches down a little bit farther to the south of I-20, but nonetheless you need to know northern central Georgia. So that's mainly areas like Warner Robins and Macon, all the way over into counties like Washington, Twiggs, Wilkinson, over to Crawford, Upson counties. If you live in those counties or farther up to the north, you have the greatest potential for seeing some form of impacts. And it's not going to take much ice to have some of those impacts. Here's a look at how much ice can really maybe start to have some complications in terms of down trees, down power lines and such. 1/10 of an inch. That's just going to be more of a light glaze, kind of a nuisance ice, if you will. Slick spots on the sidewalks and some roads, but you're going to want to be careful while walking and driving. Now, not too much more than that, only about 1/4 of an inch. That's where ice begins to become problematic. Coated on windshields and cars, dangerous over bridges, overpass, and it's tough to stop on those roads once you get going. Trees and power lines start to fail. Now, if we have some areas get about 1/2 inch of ice, this is where it starts to have some crippling impacts, widespread tree and power line damages. Then you will start to have impassable roads, no travel whatsoever, and power outages could last for days as it takes a while for that accumulation of ice to melt. Some areas in northern Georgia are forecasting 1 inch or 1.5 inches of ice. That is not forecasted here in central Georgia, very thankfully, but I wouldn't doubt that we could have maybe a select few areas in our northernmost counties that see accumulations up to this. We'll keep our fingers crossed that is not the case, but obviously this is going to be a much more historic and drastic impact storm up in northern Georgia, north of central Georgia, as opposed to down here, very thankfully. And what we have seen so far, we have a winter storm watch that is in effect for northern Georgia, northeastern Georgia, and the National Weather Service has highlighted an extension to the south is possible, and in fact pretty likely. They are going to make a decision by 1 p.m. this afternoon, and I do imagine the next update will include the metro Atlanta area and this next southern row of counties along I-20. I imagine it will still take some time to maybe make its way into central Georgia, but if we see anyone added into a winter storm watch today, it's more than likely going to be Jasper, Putnam, and Hancock counties, and then eventually we might see it sag a little bit farther down to the south. But again, there's still a good deal of uncertainty about the impacts with this winter storm the farther and farther south that you travel, so we will continue to keep you updated if anyone is put in some form of an advisory, a winter storm warning, or a winter storm watch. So my takeaways from everything that I've seen as of this morning: I've done a lot of digging. There are a bunch of different models saying a bunch of different things. Sorry, I almost dropped the clicker right there. But I have the most confidence in those impacts, once again, in northern central Georgia. So now, if you live Warner Robins to Macon, maybe northward, that's where you just want to start reviewing your plan. Make sure that you're ready to go in case things do change in an instant and we start to see more of that wintry precipitation farther up to the north and more accumulation of ice. It's better to prepare for the worst and always hope for the best. Some models are going to be calling for highs in the 50s and the 60s, the Euro and the GFS, and that's likely what your weather app is pulling from. But I'm not too confident in that. I'm more so backing our high resolution model, the graph model, with highs that are going to be scattered in the 30s. But again, it's going to really depend on how strong that wedge does hold as we go into the afternoon hours on Saturday, and then how long that wedge does stand as we go into the day on Sunday. I do expect it to start to fall apart as we go into Sunday, but it is going to have some drastic impacts. If we do have some 50s and 60s in the afternoon, we're not talking wintry mix whatsoever. That is not even going to be close to the threshold where you can see some wintry precipitation. And looking like a rain event for most of southern central Georgia. If that changes, we'll of course let you know. But when I say just make sure that you prepare for the worst and hope for the best, maybe going out, just getting a few extra groceries and things. I'm not telling you to raid the milk and the bread and the eggs and everything, but and maybe just buy a little bit more than what you normally should. At the worst case scenario, you have your groceries for the next 2 weeks, and obviously you won't have to make another trip back there. So that's where your weather impact alert is still for. Later Saturday all the way through Monday morning. We'll continue to keep you updated with everything that you need to know, but make plans to try to avoid driving on Sunday morning, and we'll let you know about those travel plans as we go into Monday morning as well. Thanks for tuning in. We'll see you here all throughout the day with more updates.